really excited for our event today. Thank you for joining us. We are here today for a panel on data models and standards for enterprise blockchain supply chain applications. And we have 241 people from 43 countries around the world signed up. So this is really exciting to be speaking with such a large audience, especially on such an important topic. My name is Alicia NOEL. I research and consult on food and ag supply chain innovation, especially related to traceability and blockchain applications. Here today, we have 4 leaders in the industry. We have Gena Morgan, who is one of the creators of EPCIS. She's with GS1, both global and US. We have Phil Harris, who's at the nexus of traceability and the internet. Dominic, who is the founder and CEO of EVRYTHNG, and Branimir, RAKI쪼, who is co-founder and CTO of OriginTrail. So we're going to start today with brief talks from each of our panelists, and then we'll move into the panel after that. If you have any questions, please do type them into the Q&A. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a little Q&A button. So you can type your questions there as well as into the chat. And we'll be moving into our panel now. So we're going to start this morning with Gena Morgan. Gena, your show.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. To speak to you about how GS1's been working with industry to explore the possibilities of blockchain. GS1 is an industry-governed standards organization with 113 member organizations around the world. That means we have a global office, and then we have affiliated country member organizations, each there to serve the requirements of our industries in different sectors, from CPG to healthcare to food service and apparel and general merchandise. GS1 has worked tirelessly over the last 40 some odd years to develop what we call the global language of business. Again, a set of standards for unique identification, data sharing, and the like to explore efficiencies and really look to providing transparency and efficiency within the supply chain. So when we started exploring blockchain and what it really was and how it had any relationship to supply chains from its origin and Bitcoin and the like, we're like, what is this really all about? And I spent probably about a year to 18 months exploring what the possibilities were. And what we kind of came down to, and what we tried to boil it down to, was this is really about data sharing. This is what all the hype is about. Blockchain being, and the distributed ledger technology being, a solution choice that underpins and provides a certain degree of trust. But what really industry was looking toward and looking to do with this technology was really all about data sharing. And for some industries, especially when it came to traceability and visibility, this is kind of an entirely new concept. Others had been along this journey of traceability and visibility with GS1 for some time, and members of the healthcare industry in particular, and looking at how they could leverage standards-based data sharing to solve for some specific problems. But and then others were really just looking to explore what it meant generally in a set of advanced use cases. But at the end of the day, it was really all about data sharing, and that was the excitement about blockchain. So we kind of came to the conclusion that this is how we would look to explain this to our constituency and kind of situate ourselves and where did GS1 and standards fit. So we look at blockchain as a solution choice. It's a solution choice, distributed ledger as being one, a cloud-based storage solution being another. We looked at blockchain as really this way to store and then data and provide an audit and provide trust and all of the different aspects that blockchain technology brings to it, but it really is kind of foundational solution choice. And it really feeds the business application, or it helps support the business applications, which is where the real supply chain problems are solved for. Right there in the middle is where we believe standards sit. And with respect to kind of the business problems that industry is trying to solve with blockchain, and in the initial exploration, it's really about traceability and visibility. So for that particular use case, Standards are essential, and we talk about unique identification, globally unique identification, which is at the core of what GS1 does, is essential. And then standardized data models, and that can be standardized EDI transactions for order to cash. That's what we kind of categorize as transactional data. Master data is essential to have a standardized language for how people describe products or locations or entities and the like. And then a standardized data model for visibility event data. That's really the what, where, when, and why about something that traverses the supply chain, and that is our EPCIS standard. So we sit here in the middle with a whole slew of standards that support business applications, and then can provide kind of the requirements for what might be written to a blockchain at some point in time. The other thing that we like to really explain to folks is, especially as there have been different solutions that have emerged that may have a blockchain foundation, maybe it's a cloud system foundation. The truth of the matter is all of these different ecosystems, solutions defined as an ecosystem are popping up, right? You have a number of different solutions that have a blockchain ecosystem to them. And the truth is there will not be one solution. You will not have one blockchain ecosystem and a solution with a blockchain component to it. There will be multiple, and this is something that GS1 has seen over the course of its lifetime with emerging technologies. There will never be one singular network or systems. What we see are a number of different ecosystems where you have different solution applications. Maybe there's a choice of a particular distributed ledger and a set of industry participants in that ecosystem, because we strive to provide solution choice for our membership, and that's what standards provide for as well. We envision a number of different ecosystems up there or out there in the sphere, and as long as standards are core to that, there will be this opportunity to provide for interoperability and solution choice. We believe our system of global unique identification and our standardized data models around master data, transactional data, and event data really support the plethora of use cases that sharing data across to a degree that has not been done thus far will provide for. So my pitch in the nutshell is standards make interoperability possible. Again, unique identification and standardized data models for whatever business problem you're trying to solve are the core to it. And then standards make transparency and trust possible. And GS1 is investing quite a bit of energy and resource around this idea of trust and how you can provide layers of trust within the data that we communicate in a standards-based way. So GS1 is in the center of all of this fun and exciting thing, all of these fun and exciting things that are occurring, and we look forward to the journey with everyone. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gena. That was great. Phil, would you like to speak?
I will. So everybody, I'm Phil Archer. I used to be at W3C. I've been with GS1 now for more than 3 years. And it's my pleasure to be able to work on the kind of things that Gena was just talking about. The main thing I spend my time working on these days is called GS1 Digital Link. And it's our way to connect things to whatever you want to connect it to. I talk about the web. If you want to connect it to a blockchain, connect it to a blockchain. I don't care. It's at the end of a URL, and do whatever works for you. If you've had any kind of connection with linked data and the semantic web over the last 20 years, it's very likely you'll have come across or at least heard of these documents. On the left, Tim Berners-Lee wrote "Cool URIs don't change" back in 1998. It was his explanation of how you can mint a web identifier that doesn't change. It stays persistent over the long period. It was the first attempt to design a URL, if you like. 10 years later, those ideas were expanded upon in the semantic web in Cool URIs for the same web. And those are foundational to a lot of thinking that goes into something that's actually so simple and so straightforward, you tend not to think about it. Those globally unique identifiers that we use that go underneath the barcode at the bottom of packs that go beep at the checkout, you probably call it a barcode. You might call it an EAN. In the States, you'll call it a UPC. GTIN is the generic name for that, Global Trade Item Number. And that's the term we use. And putting a GTIN into a URL, you know, it's really very simple. You stick it on the end of something, /GTIN/ there's a number. We can expand that though. And we've defined exactly how to also include batch numbers, which is really important if you're doing traceability, down to serial level. Away from items, we can identify locations and shipments and companies and all the other kind of things that Gena talked about. So there's a lot of different things that we can do with the GS1 system, which has been around now for nearly 50 years. And we simply move that into the world where it can be expressed as a web URI. And for a lot of companies, a lot of our members, that's actually enough. People like Procter & Gamble, for now, that's what they want, because it is a URL on a pack and it's a product identifier. So today you can use it and you can scan it and you can get to whether it's traceability on a blockchain or whatever else it may be, some kind of experience, but also it has those GS1 identifiers. But we can go further, and GS1 Digital Link has many more layers that we can add on top if we want to. Once you've got a web presence, you can link to it and you can link from it. So we can link from that identity to information given by the brand. We can link to third-party information, such as traceability or extra nutritional information or certification that it's organic or kosher or whatever it may be. We can link to master data, business-to-business processes. You can link from the identifier to those things. And we can link to promotions and all sorts of user experiences. All these things are possible. And you'll notice that those links, they're not just pointing at something, those links themselves are typed. They have a label, which is itself a URL. And if you do that, you start from one URL, you have another URL that labels the arc that goes to the other one. That looks a lot like a link relation type, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Or if you're an RDF head, it looks a lot like an RDF predicate. And if you're Browner, then you'll be thinking, oh, this is the basis of my knowledge graph. All this is true. But it starts from that core thing, which is the GS1 identifier and that means of linking to and from it so that everything becomes part of an information space. There's a lot more I could go into, but not in 5 minutes, so I'll stop there. GS1 Digital Link, it's linked data. If you like, it's hypermedia, if you're into that kind of thing, but it's based on those GS1 identifiers. It is a standard, it's non-proprietary. We have loads of open source code on GitHub, and we have a free resolver service available if you want to play with that and you know, experiment and see what you can do with it. What it means is that for our community, we're offering this means to link from a pack to whatever it may be. It's a standards based, it's an enabler. It means that if you put a QR code or an NFC tag or even just a humble barcode on your pack, it can do more without being locked into a particular provider. I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Phil. That's fascinating. Branimir, would you like to speak about OriginTrail and the amazing work you're doing there?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the compliment. Sure. I think it feeds very well into what has just been said. I'll share a very brief presentation with everyone. So as Phil pointed out in one of the previous slides, actually I'll be touching upon the topic of decentralized knowledge graph, and actually fits very nicely into the intro made by Gena. So essentially I'll just really quickly introduce who we are. For those of you who don't know about OriginTrail, our mission is really to make supply chains work, and the idea is to do it together. And that's something I will quickly introduce through the principles that we are using to get there, but also what type of technology we're building. So essentially the industry challenge is really traceability. This is one of a very sort of simple slides that explains that it's kind of a common thing that people talk about, this one step back, one step forward traceability, while it's really hard to get data across a specific supply chain in one place and visible. And that's due to this problem of data sharing that we really sort of started talking from the beginning. And in that sense, we sort of have defined this problem a bit more precisely, where we say that it's actually bad data that it's hurting supply chains. So bad data is really unstructured data. So that data has not been structured in such a way that it conforms to a specific standard, so that either businesses or machines can really understand it. And below you can see actually some quotes that emphasize how big of a problem this really is. Untrusted data is also bad data. If you cannot have integrity in the data that you're viewing, then it's very questionable if the data even makes sense looking into. And then finally, inaccessible data is bad data, because if you're not able to get to it, then obviously it's very hard to do much with it. So all of these three key problems are something that the OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph is attempting to solve. How do we do this? Well, through the OriginTrail ecosystem, which three key pillars of are the neutrality. So we're building open source technologies for cross-organizational data exchange, and in that way being neutral. Building inclusive alliances, mainly through the Trace Alliance, where organizations and companies together with the OriginTrail community share and work on solutions together. And finally, through Trace Labs, who is the core development company of OriginTrail, really focusing on usability. So building these business applications that Gena was mentioning at the beginning on top of the stack. How do we do it? Well, this might look very much like Gena's slide. So on top, once you envision the business applications at the application layer and the blockchain underneath as the underpinning layer for trust, in between is something that we have spawned together with our community running around almost 600 nodes globally right now. Is called the OriginTrail Decentralized Network, which actually supports this knowledge graph that is designed for data sharing. It's a permissionless open source network that anyone can really join, and it's designed as a neutral middleware. How is it designed? Well, it's not a consensus algorithm, so it's not a blockchain. It utilizes blockchain, but it utilizes within its data layer open source standards. And by that, I mean GS1 standards, W3C standards, and others. I'll mention some in a few. But what does the graph element really mean? Well, essentially, you can think of it as kind of a sort of an analogous situation to private and public data on the internet. So we see all these websites that are public, part of this web, right? And then we have some private data hosted within our maybe computers or organizations, something that stays within our system. Well, we see this as one big graph. If you take care and link this data together in a certain verifiable manner, like the OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph does, then you're able to actually have these private subgraphs that organizations are able to share while actually attaching them to this public subgraph. And that actually looks quite a lot like some of the GS1 standards, such as the, or W3C emerging standards, such as the decentralized identifiers, which result to the documents, and then finally to verifiable credentials. But to not go deeper into that right away, just quickly finalize what we're really looking at, the landscape here. Essentially, we like to speak of the knowledge graph in terms of the DIKW pyramid, or the data, information, knowledge, and wisdom pyramid, where the data is basically very present and growing at an exponential rate, available in many already existing systems, including blockchains. Going to the level of information we get through actually the semantic technology that Phil introduced, where absolutely it's a must to utilize standards in order to get the structure that is needed to obtain linked data, and that's where the OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph really helps. Going towards the knowledge, which is really the layer of implemented business applications which give this information context, and then finally achieving the vision through such applications of something we like to call the Google for supply chains. Now that's a very brief intro into what we do. I'm sure there's going to be some more opportunity to speak throughout the panel, but I won't be taking any more time because I think I'm basically out. So I will stop sharing here. Thanks.
Branimir, thank you so much. That was great. Really helped make it clear the extent of the work that you're doing with OriginTrail. Now, Dominic, you're doing some very interesting work at everything as well that is extremely powerful. So please, we'd love to hear from you on what you're doing there.
Sure, yeah. We're actually a member of GS1, but also a member of the Trace Alliance that Branimir was just talking about. And our goal is primarily to connect consumer products to the web. That's our mission, right? Our mission in life is to connect all kinds of consumer products to the web. We're looking at consumer products that are usually not connected to the web. So things like apparel items, CPG are good examples of our target markets. And then our goal is basically to provide this product cloud in the middle. So this platform that lets you generate identities, manage them at scale, and connect them to the bigger ecosystem. And the bigger ecosystem can be different enterprise systems, consumer applications through our SDKs, or blockchains as we connect with a number of blockchains, as you'll see later on. So essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to transform products from being offline to being online. And here on the screen, you have an example of probably one of the most advanced product we've ever helped to launch, which is a new soda called Fact from a brand called Almond. And these kinds of soda have a unique token under the ring pool. That's a unique identity linked directly to the web. And then also linked directly to the blockchain, where you can use it for things like full traceability of the ingredients, but also things like getting rewards. Each token, each physical token corresponds to a digital token that you can use to get rewards. And that's just an example of how we turn these fairly dumb products into fully connected products. Some more examples. I'm just going to talk about two of them. One of them is with Ralph Lauren. We've helped them, giving them digital identities, as Phil was discussing before, kind of digital link, digital identities. And the goal for these digital identities is that each shirt or each garment gets a unique identity, and this identity can be used for different things. For consumers, it can be used for consumer engagement, such as knowing more about the product, knowing where the product comes from. For the brand itself, it can be used for authenticity tracking, supply chain tracking, and in particular, detecting parallel trading as well as backdoor goods. Backdoor goods is when a factory of a particular brand produces illegal goods, and that does happen quite frequently in markets such as the apparel market. The second example here on the screen is Movi. Movi is one of the biggest salmon manufacturers in the world, and here as a consumer you can scan the pack of Movi. Each pack of Movi has a batch level digital link, as Phil was explaining. Data is stored in an EPCIS on our side. And when you scan it as a consumer, you basically get to know exactly where the product comes from, up to really even the weight of the salmon and the average temperature of the sea. So giving full transparency. And the way we do that is by creating these digital identities unique for each product, again, connecting them to the garments. They're being scanned throughout the supply chain, such as in the factories, but also later on during any step of the supply chain that we can instrument. Then this data goes into usually the brand ERPs and different information systems, and also sometimes now in the past year or so, goes also to a number of blockchains for different use cases, such as data sharing using the OriginTrail blockchain, or other use cases such as enhancing the trust around the data. And finally, consumers can scan this identity and get the data rendered to them in a way that's accessible, which isn't EPCIS events, because that would probably not be accessible for most people, but transformed into something that's a nice UX and understandable for the consumers. One last part about standards. So standards are also very, very important for us. We've always been, big advocates of using standards. And you can see some of the ones we use here. So we helped at the beginning of everything of co-founding the W3C Web of Things standard, which is a standard to bring very intelligent items to the web, so such as consumer electronics or things that have sensing capabilities or actuating capabilities. And so that's a standard we help with. And then more recently, we helped with the digital link that Phil was talking about. I'm co-chairing the digital link, representing more the industry side in that group, where Phil, of course, leads the whole group from a GS1 point of view. And then also, we had the chance to work on the EPCIS 2.0 back a few years ago when I was still a researcher, I wrote a paper called Giving EPCIS a Rest. And that paper was one of the sources of inspiration for the new EPCIS standard, which goal is basically to bring the EPCIS to the web. And that's a very exciting new version of the EPCIS. And so for us, standards are extremely important. They help us better compete with our competitors, but also generally they help us doing the right thing, right? Instead of locking our customers into everything identities that they cannot use with any other vendor, using standards such as Digital Link and EPCIS means that they have a choice to move. That's also part of our responsibility, and I'd say also my personal responsibility to ensure that things can outlive everything and can outlive any unique system, which I think standards and decentralization is a great way of achieving that, ensuring there is no vendor lock-in. Thank you. That's it on my side as well.
Dom, thank you for that. Like, fascinating hearing about the work you're doing, especially the developing of the standards and the way that you've been working with GS1 and the other bodies and helping work on EPCIS. I think this gives us the opportunity to go back to EPCIS to make sure that everyone who is participating, everyone who's here today understands what that is. Gena, you really helped create that as well. So I'd love to hear from you if you can talk a bit about what EPCIS is, what that means for companies, and then Brana and Dom, if you want to touch in as well on how this has affected the work you're doing.
Sure. EPCIS is, I always define it as two things. It's a technical interface standard that defines two interfaces. There's a data capture interface and a data query interface. So there's this core model that is centered around capturing event data. And we describe it as what, where, when, and why, and sometimes who. So what did I see? When did I see it? What was happening when I observed it? And that could be a shipping event or a receiving event or a transformation event or something like that. What's the disposition of that now? And who are involved parties, like what was the source and what was the destination? So it really provides a data model for capturing that, that event, physical event information. And then there's a query interface as well that allows me to issue a query to Dom, let's say, his EPCIS server, to say, what events do you have about this particular product or G10 or what have you, whatever the query parameters, it specifies a set of query parameters as well. The EPCIS standard, again, is just a standardized set of interfaces. It doesn't prescribe where that data then goes. And in its original incarnation, which I did facilitate the beginning, that was 15 years ago, Dom and a lot of other great folks have brought that forward into today's kind of technology. But it was always envisioned that it would be a way to share data in a distributed way. So there was no big repository in the sky that all supply chain partners put their data into. It wasn't even one singular necessary blockchain that people would put all of their EPCIS events into. Everyone holds on to their own specific events, and there's a way to connect and query for that supply chain data. So EPCIS, again, is relatively old. It's like about 13 years old now, but it has seen a resurgence in importance and value. And, you know, sometimes standards that get created a little bit before industry might be prepared for them. What I will say about blockchain in particular is that the hype around it and the use cases around it have really brought forth this focus on traceability and enabling traceability, and brought EPCIS and what it can do back to life. So many of the solutions that you hear about out in the marketplace that have a blockchain component to those solutions are based on EPCIS. If it's for supply chain, Dom has a solution, but there are many others out there. And so we're pretty excited about how that standard will enable visibility and drive towards even more advanced use cases than traceability.
Thank you. I mean, that is really something that's going to have huge implications for the industry. Branimir, would you like to speak about how you've been involved in this and what this has meant to you at OriginTrail?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been actually quite often sort of a topic of this discussion of supply chain, blockchain sort of realm, that we sort of get blockchain in the front light and really not mention standards too much. And that's why I'm really excited that on this panel we have it sort of the other way around, because it really is the other way around. Blockchain is a very useful technology. I'm a big fan, but I believe it's only a very small part of the solution, an important one. But there's many other elements to what the technology needs to do, and which blockchain doesn't really help doing. In that sense, the standards absolutely come first. So when we first started building supply chain transparency solutions specifically for food industry, that was 2011 was the first thing we actually started working together, and then 2013 we started the company and actually expanded the product. There was no blockchain there at all, because we could do that without blockchain. We basically sort of created our own version of an EPCIS repository, so there was a database behind it, and we were basically structuring the information from the supply chain according to EPCIS and answering really the 4 questions: who, when, where, what, and why. The 5 questions. Apologies. This works. This works fine. If you're looking at a small supply chain, if you're looking at a global network where you're sharing among partners you might not know, or there might be sort of in that chain or really supply chain network a bit further away from you that you have some sort of a trust relationship with them, then that's blockchain, where blockchain comes in. That's really its territory to enhance trust. And in that sense, what we've been building with OriginTrail over the past decade almost has sort of evolved going into blockchain, adding it on to the existing solutions. And the existing solution, that's why I'm speaking so much about the knowledge graph, is really there to support the standards, to support the data sharing, while the blockchain does really 3 things in this big decentralized network, which is to verify identity. And that's why I mentioned the decentralized identifier standard, which is sort of a thing that I feel we might have we might touch upon later with Phil as well, who I know has been involved in drafting it at least. And also this verifiability. So if you would like to have a certain data set, be that an EPCI data set or EPCIS data set, or maybe something else, something that doesn't fit the standard, you can still utilize blockchain to verify the integrity of it. But if we're looking at the perspective of supply chain, it's really EPCIS and the associated standards that have to go with it if you really want to start even speaking about any sort of visibility when it comes to what's going on within the supply chain. So I feel it's an important point to make, that blockchain is really just one of the tools, and not necessarily the only tool, and not necessarily even a good tool for some things, because it quite often is also labeled as a distributed database technically, but those of us who are sort of involved in computer science know how what the problems of distributed systems are, and if you're trying to build a consensus on top of a distributed systems, well, you get the trade-off that you have to live with somehow, and that's really scale. That's why we see such problems with Ethereum and these public blockchains that are, I believe, great and revolutionary, but they're not really supposed to be used as databases. That's why we have databases in the first place. So in that sense, I feel that has to be said. We need to bust this myth, though it's not to say that blockchain doesn't fit the equation. But if you were to ask me what's more important, I would say GS1 standards. And that's my case.
Thank you. Dom, you're seeing this from a different side. What are you seeing in your work at EVRYTHNG around the use of these standards? And how is it affecting you?
Yeah, well, as I briefly mentioned in the introduction, I think standards allow companies to compete, but they also allow avoiding vendor lock-in and ensuring interoperability across the systems. And the customers we work with are primarily big customers, big brands, the Fortune 500 type of companies that we're targeting. And of course, they care a lot about ensuring their data is free and their data is interoperable. So for them, it is a must. The use of standard is always a must. And the EPCIS standard itself, you know, we get a lot of supply chain data from these customers, a lot of traceability, end-to-end traceability data from them. And the way they want to send it is using a standard. So it was kind of an obvious choice. Though I have to say one thing, the current GS1 EPCIS standard for us and for our customers was full of complexities. It's a rather, I mean, it's a great standard at its core, but the protocols it uses are rather old school. So I'm really welcoming EPCIS 2.0, which should come pretty soon now, because it will basically allow to use web standards rather than WSDL and SOAP services for those who are technical amongst the listeners. So that for me will be a great relief, will allow using EPCIS in a much more broad way. And I expect also the standard to take off in a much bigger way than it has so far, thanks to these to these new integrations. Because ultimately, it's really a standard that will allow interoperability across systems that track the supply chain data, whether they're based on blockchain or not. Actually, you need on top of any information system that holds supply chain data as standard, so that you can exchange it. And this is a great way to do it with the EPCIS.
Oh, that's excellent to hear. So we're looking forward to the rollout of EPCIS 2.0. Now, Gena and Phil, you're working on creating these standards. How do you make sure that standards meet industry needs? And then we get into the chicken and egg issue of how do we make sure that systems that industry is designing also align with standards. So Gena and Phil, if you can start with that, I'd love to hear from you on that.
Standards are, if you don't have implementations, it's a work of fiction. Anyone can write a document and write standard across the top. It's not. It's if you just write that yourself, then you're just whistling in the dark and you are hoping someone's going to pick it up. To be worthy of the name, the standard has to be a collaborative effort by the people who are going to use it. Otherwise, it's pointless. And we have a robust process, as all leading standards bodies do. We don't do anything unless we are, forced is too strong a word, strongly encouraged, unless we have the buy-in of industry. So before you start a working group that's going to develop a standard, who wants it? Who's going to build it? All that kind of stuff. And if no one's going to build it, then you throw it away because it wasn't worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. I'll just follow up on it because it is kind of sometimes a chicken and an egg. GS1 does have a robust standards development process that depends on commitment to implement as well, and end user requirements and all of those things. And I've been through a lot of emerging technologies, RFID being one of them, master data sharing, and then event sharing, where all of these things have developed. But I will say that GS1, we are lucky that we also are committed to the exploration as part of a number of innovation teams across the globe of emerging technologies and what that intersection of emerging tech and standards might be, so that we can tell the story of where things are going to then bring industry back to help fill in the gaps from a requirements perspective. So, for example, we also are looking at this added layer of trust that decentralized identity and verifiable credentials could bring to untrusted parties that need to share data. And so looking at how that technology, which is being developed in the W3C, might intersect with GS1's federated system of identity, and how that brings more trust into our entire system is something that we're exploring as an innovation team. That this isn't something that folks that typically interact with GS1 in their day job to realize supply chain efficiencies may be focused on, but we try to do that with some of our innovative companies to see what direction that is headed, to then present before industry on how it can add to or solve new business challenges that they may have. So I feel very fortunate to be on that side of the GS1 team, where you're exploring where things are headed, so that the investments that our organizations have made in this system of identity and standards within GS1 will last another 50 years, frankly.
That's really important, that they last long term. Now, one thing that came up when Phil and I were speaking recently was the need to make sure that these standards also meet the need of everyone who might be using them. All of us here speaking today are either from the US or Europe. How do we make sure the standards work in an environment in Latin America or Africa or Southeast Asia? And what is being done to make sure that people from other parts of the world are included in the conversation?
Well, the GS1 standards process is global. And so our member organizations, at the beginning, I said we had 113 member organizations, and they really act locally to understand what those local requirements are, and then bring them back up as part of the global process. One thing that I can't stress enough, and I've been beating this drum for a long time now, is the importance of the partnership with the solution provider community, especially when it comes to things like EPCIS, which is a technical interface standard. I mean, I can tell the story to end users to say, you've got to capture data at this point, and you're in the supply chain where you want visibility, and tell the story that way. But the fact of the matter is, the details of that and the technical details that are prescribed in EPCIS are really important. That message is really important to convey to the technical solution providers that are serving those needs through their solutions to the end users. So I've spent quite a bit of time out in the field, making partnerships and relationships with the technical community to say, this is the language of business to solve for visibility and traceability. And it's really important that that is included in your technical solutions, so that there is this breadth of choice within industry for implementations across solution choice, because you don't get scale in anything unless there is solution choice and scalability, which standards provides for all of that.
If I just add to that,
that makes complete sense.
You brought it up.
Really glad to hear that there is so much partnership going on. Phil, did you want to add something to that?
Just very briefly, I'm conscious of time. We have questions in the Q&A that we haven't answered yet, so I'm conscious of that. This issue around inclusion is something that really people like me need to do more about. I am exactly the kind of person that gets to write standards. I'm an overweight, middle-aged, native-speaking, loudmouth, arrogant Englishman. We get to write standards. People in sub-Saharan Africa or parts of China don't. And it's not because we don't want those people to write those standards. We absolutely desperately do. But do they get a chance to? I come from the baggage of GS1 Global Office. Hey, I did 8 years of W3C. I've got there's a kind of a thing there that people feel scared of because they don't know me. I love being told I'm wrong. And if somebody from the global south says, I found this out and need to change it, I'd be delighted. But it doesn't happen, and people like me need to make a change.
I just, and really quickly, I do see a question in the chat. Does industry, in quotes, include all stakeholders of the supply chain need? You know, we do serve a large number of different types of sectors. It's primarily in the retail space, but CPG, grocery, food service, pharmaceuticals, construction, apparel and general merchandise, healthcare, all of those are industries that we do serve. In addition to that, we do have partnerships in our member organizations around the globe, facilitate partnership with regulatory bodies and other NGOs. And I'm working on a project now focused around traceability and visibility, where we partner with other industry consortiums to say, these are industry standards that are developed. How does that fit? And we take input from them as well. So we're not doing this totally in a vacuum with just the folks that show up time and time again to actually draft those standards. We do have a lot of inputs into that process and a lot of partnerships into what we are doing, and we do a lot of outreach in partnership in that regard as well. I will also say that a number of GS1 standards are recognized as ISO standards as well, so you'll see them in that regard.
That's really important to know that GS1 standards are being recognized as ISO standards. So I want to make sure that we're including questions from our attendees today. So looking those over, and we've got some interesting ones, some really good ones. One question that I think a lot of people have from Shifam. I believe it's Shifam. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. If we put wrong information in blockchain, if a contamination occurs, do we need to trace back the supply chain manually to find the source of contamination? Now, Branimir and Dom, how are you handling that, or how are your customers handling that when they found out that information in their chain is incorrect?
Yeah, so let me really briefly start. The first element to that problem is actually having the data available. And that means if you have information only on part of the events, what have been going on, obviously you're going to be able to review that. The blockchain is not gonna be a truth machine that's going to say this is really happened or not. It's really a way to verify the integrity of the data, so the data hasn't been corrupted or manipulated in some way. But it's really a garbage in, garbage out thing. So you can still put anything inside and it will take it. It's not going to complain. So in that sense, really what ends up being important here is that if you really want to use data-supported make data-supported decisions like this in the case of contamination or recall, you have to have the data in the first place. You have to be able to understand the data, which is really employ the right standard and data models, and then finally be able to access this data. And that's one of the things that's also very important from the blockchain perspective, because a lot of people think putting this data on the blockchain, especially a public one, makes sense. I would argue against it because, first of all, putting something in a public blockchain that could be even sensitive for a company or a personally identifiable information is something you generally should not do. On the other hand, if it's a public blockchain like Ethereum, it might cost you a lot, because putting a little bit of data on Ethereum blockchain is, well, currently in the realm of hundreds of dollars, actually, if you want to just use a couple of kilobytes of information for one transaction. There's obvious limits to these solutions, but there's an emerging ecosystem. There's a lot of new exciting technologies in the blockchain space being developed, which is actually why we are, and we're actually going to be publishing an updated roadmap around that. We're building the OriginTrail technology to be blockchain agnostic, that it can actually work with multiple blockchains. That's something we also see Dom and his team and everything are doing really well. And we had the opportunity, when we had the opportunity to work together on implementations previously, essentially integrating the system, the EVRYTHNG platform and an OriginTrail node. The most important thing there again was that we were speaking in terms of GS1 EPCIS. This is really the language for machines that need to speak about these things. I also saw a question about the graph, because it fits on this one. Do we put a graph on the chain? How do we do it? Essentially, in a very short nutshell, how we do it within the OriginTrail system is not to put the data on the blockchain. The blockchain contains several pieces of proofs that allow you to verify the integrity of this graph, which is stored on the OriginTrail network, which some consider to be an L2 network, let's say. And this network really is there to support data connectivity. So basically link data, or the notion of semantic web that Phil introduced in the beginning. So that's the shortest possible answer to that question.
That makes complete sense. Thank you for touching on that. We've got some questions that I think are specifically for Dom. An anonymous attendee is asking for clarification that all the entities using EVRYTHNG's product cloud, something just moved, will be running their data sets through the original decentralized network, and is asking if you can touch on your customers' data being on the OriginTrail blockchain. Can you give an example of a use case in terms of the type of data and how much data is generally stored and shared?
Yes, yeah, sure. I mean, well, and part of the answer was in Branimir's comment just before, right? So first of all, no, not all of the data from our customers is stored by OriginTrail. Our customers have a choice to use it or to choose another form, even not the blockchain or another blockchain. There's some pretty good advantages in using OriginTrail, but not all our customers do. We have a number of live projects. It's not 100 live projects, but we have a few live projects with OriginTrail. One of them is in the textile industry, for instance, for a brand called ALICS. That's one of the labels that's on the garment, which is a digital link, and then connected to the EVRYTHNG platform with EPCIS data, and some of this data synchronized to the OriginTrail network. So no, not all of the data, some, and I think that's the strategy we chose. We don't believe in absolutely all of the data will be on blockchains. We believe that there'll be an ecosystem, and we're building around the blockchains. But by far not all our customers use it. And then I think Branimir said something very important, right? We don't store the entire data set of the supply chain data on the blockchain. We actually route some of it to be able to prove that the data wasn't tampered with, and share some of it via EPCIS events when this is requested from our customers. But you know, putting the entire data from a supply chain on a blockchain doesn't sound like a good idea, actually.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, because we get this question quite a bit. Like, blockchain doesn't serve as the data exchange mechanism, right? There are parts and pieces of the data that are stored on chain for purposes of auditability or whatever, but really that rich contextual data that parties use to understand what's happening in the supply chain is exchanged off chain, and can be done, and is done via the EPCIS standard with the multiple solutions. But it's not, everything is not just plain text put out there on blockchain. First of all, no one would ever do it. Second of all, it's just not scalable. And so, and to be fair, I mean, this is a kind of newer technology that we are trying to understand how it actually does serve best the problems that industry is trying to solve for. Is it necessarily required for traceability? We could probably have a whole call and discussion on that, but it does have features and functionality, trust, time order transactions, and immutable data, and so those solutions that have that as its foundation can bring that forward. But it may also set the stage for more advanced use cases like automated order to cash and payment and these types of things, and that's why we're continuing to explore it, but always going back to, well, what business problem are we solving for, and how do we do that, and where is blockchain required or not required, but then how can we build off of it? So I think those are all really important things to think about. It all goes back to what business problem you're solving for.
Thank you, Gena. These are some really important things to think about. And in the Q&A thing, John Keogh is here on the call today, and he wanted to bring to our attention how important it is to stress that the GS1 standards are technology neutral. They don't compete with any type of technology solutions. They are neutral, and that's important. Gina Ruda asked the question, how does GS1 coordinate with public entities or non-governmental entities, etc.? How are you avoiding codependency on the private power dynamics that have standard things like extraction or consumption? Is this something that GS1 is looking at consciously?
Yes, I'm pleased to say. And thank you for the question, Gina. I was going to make sure, if Alicia hadn't got to your question, I was going to contact you afterwards. Yes, this is very much on our radar. We're working on it. I can tell you that I'm talking to former colleagues at W3C, and we're trying to propose some work with the European Commission on this. We want to make it easy for you as a consumer and for other people to recognize things like carbon footprint, air miles, and so on that a particular product has within it. And yes, recycling and reuse options and so on. We're very much in that space. I'll give you one little snippet that has changed I've only been at GS1 for 3 years or so. During that time, there was a quite remarkable change that you think, really, that wasn't true before? Those GTINs, those numbers we apply? Before I joined GS1, I didn't do this, I'm just saying that, you know, go back a few years, it was okay for you to reuse those numbers for something else. You can't do that now, right? Once you apply a GTIN to a product, that's it. And one of the reasons for that is exactly the one you're saying, because there's value in identifying that thing after it's been sold. And so that's one of the reasons why we did it.
Yeah, I would say persistence in identity, global uniqueness, and then persistence. And in granularity, because up to now, like we haven't necessarily always tracked that down to levels of granularity that are essential. And so building on what the origin of the system was, you know, going deep at the checkout, and creating persistence. And Dom showed an example of that, that identifier has to follow the product, and it can't be, you know, removed. It has to be persistent to realize all of these things, but the system is robust enough to do such.
Great. Thank you. I've got my eye on the clock and we're almost at the end of the hour. So I want to end on one question, another question from John Keogh. He said for Branimir, but I think Dom can also touch on this as well. What's the difference? Can you explain the difference between data provenance and scientific provenance for food products, other related products, and the importance of analytical data? Because a lot of blockchain companies claim they can guarantee provenance, but what they're really talking about is data provenance, which is not the same thing as scientific provenance.
So to be very short, the part I mentioned where you really collect data, what's been happening, it's really, you're getting sort of this concept of data provenance more than really scientific. You figure out like who has been providing data, what type of data, when, and so forth. So you can sort of see this paper trail really, which doesn't necessarily go one in hand to, like, let's say, a product. While on the other hand, for example, you can think of, let's say, doing a laboratory test somewhere in a country where you're able to identify isotopes of specific atoms in this soil, for example. And then you can, let's say, buy a tomato from Serbia and then, I don't know, eat it in Hungary. And if you do a same comparison or some similar product like that, you're able to see that, oh, it really indeed comes from Serbia because I actually tested it with something that's a scientific method. Both things, I think, fit really well together. And we're actually exploring such projects throughout a project called the Laboratory Data Marketplace, which also utilizes the OriginTrail technology. But essentially, it comes down to these two different aspects. In the end, having the ability to have as much data as possible, together with these laboratory tests, for example, helps you determine the traceability from both ends. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Dom, do you want to add something to that based on what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think Branimir named it before, right? Blockchain is garbage in, garbage out, right? So basically, you need a way to prove that the data you put in was correct in the first place, and there are many ways to do so. Branimir mentioned some of them. There are also tagging technologies that are a lot safer than for instance, a QR code. Like, let's say an encrypted NFC tag is capable of emitting signed data itself, which you know makes the whole thing a lot safer. But then one may say, well, what if the tag gets opposed to the wrong product? Then, you know, that physical to digital link is definitely one where we still have a lot of challenges, and we'll see a lot of new emerging technologies in that space. Meanwhile, at least blockchain can help us trusting the data we put and trusting that the data is not modified, and that's already helpful. But not a silver bullet, definitely not.
Right. No, that need to trust the data is so important. So it's important for us to be having the conversations about how do we make sure the data is correct and being sourced and identified. We are at the end of the hour. It has passed very quickly. I want to thank everyone here today. I think we've covered a lot of different things. Thank you so much for everyone who's logged in to listen. Thank you, Gena and Phil, to bring the GS1 perspective and explain the important work you're doing there. Thank you, Branimir and Dom, for talking about what you're doing in the industry, how you're seeing things evolve, and really helping develop these standards that are going to be used across all industries. I also want to give a very special thank you to Anna Bevic at OriginTrail for her help behind the scenes with the technology. We would not, none of us would be here today without Anna's help, so thank you.
And all the PR, thank you, Anna. And thank you, Alicia, as well.
Thank you for having us, and thanks to all of our partners making this happen.
Right.
All right.
Thank you so
very
much.
Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Have a great evening, those of you where it's night. Have a great day for those of you here in the Americas. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.